Sebastian Junger. His book called Freedom came out this year. He's an excellent human being, and this is yet another excellent book. The basic dynamics of asymmetric conflict readily scale up. Insurgents like the Montenegrins cannot hope to beat a large conventional military in open combat, so they don't even try. Instead, they do what small athletes do. They stay mobile, they avoid standing toe-to-toe and trading blows, and they strike only when they can get away. Conventional armies burn through more fuel, munitions, and food in the same way that large fighters burn through more oxygen, and even wealthy nations can't afford to maintain that level of effort indefinitely. The logistical demands of a modern mechanized army are so enormous that most of its resources go into simply sustaining itself. No more than 1/3 of its soldiers are directly engaged in combat, and usually far less. Insurgents, on the other hand, are almost all engaged in combat, often including senior commanders, and they never have to win. They just have to keep not losing. Air power is also of limited value against smaller forces. In fact, there is almost an inversion of ordinary military principles. The fewer enemy there are, the harder they are to kill, and less likely they are to be defeated. A 1,000,000-man army could probably be destroyed faster than a 1,000-man insurgency, because it's completely dependent on command hierarchy and resupply. Destroy those things and there is no army. Most insurgencies, on the other hand, are composed of semi-autonomous cells that are dependent on the society they live in, and targeting civilians is a war crime. It also turns the populace against the invaders and drives them into the arms of the insurgents. Bombers and attack aircraft can drop devastating munitions on the battlefield, but they are easy for insurgents to avoid and incredibly costly to operate. There does not seem to be enough jet fuel in the world to keep enough aircraft aloft to kill all the people who are willing to die fighting them. Air power alone is never broken in insurgency, and reliance on it could almost be considered a sign of strategic failure. On the ground, combat soldiers in the U.S. military carry loads of up to 140 pounds on approach marches and 70 or 80 pounds in combat, including a 30-pound ballistic vest that traps heat and sends body temperature soaring. Machine gunners and ammo bearers routinely carry a lot more than that. The weight is a problem in hot weather when soldiers require as much as 2 or 3 gallons of water a day to avoid dehydration and heat stroke. According to the Asymmetric Warfare Group, AWG, an elite high-mobility unit within the U.S. military, soldiers are often reduced to maneuver speeds of 1 or 2 miles an hour by such loads, and yet they are fighting insurgents who can move several times as fast. The result is that Western troops struggle to corner and defeat even lightly armed insurgents. The parallel between current-day Taliban forces in Afghanistan and the Apache of the 1860s and 70s is so obvious that the School of Advanced Military Studies at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, has published a monograph on the Indian Wars. Quote, "The failed subjugation attempts assisted the Apache to develop a warrior culture based on resistance and survival through tactical action," notes the author, Major Stephen P. Snyder, a former AWG commander. The AWG was disbanded in 2020. Quote again, "The Apache created a warrior that was an expert at fighting in austere environments, understood the use of irregular tactics to render a numerically superior force vulnerable, and possessed an intrinsic warrior ideology that defeated all previous foreign invaders." After 2 decades of war in Afghanistan, the United States found itself having to negotiate with an insurgency that lacked air power, tanks, heavy artillery, and sometimes even boots. A relatively small number of Taliban insurgents fought the most powerful military in the world to a standstill, and a prior generation of Afghans did the same thing to the former Soviet Union. The Taliban represent an oppressive ideology that has almost no respect for human rights, but many insurgencies are fighting for those rights. And if all insurgencies and uprisings were easily crushed, there would be no possibility for political change or freedom in the world. Among other outcomes, the United States would not exist. However it is defined, freedom is due in part to the fact that powerful nations do not always win wars, and powerful men do not always win fights. In fact, as often as not, they lose.
That is fascinating.
Yeah.
And I would point out the obvious relevance to you, YouTube, and to our discussion of Elhanan and Goliath last week.
Precisely.
If you haven't caught up on that, that is at the beginning of last week's live stream. But I would also point out that this is relevant to the discussion which we mentioned largely between me and Jordan Peterson about what to make of myth. And this actually comes out in Jordan's column here, because the point is some myths are resonant in various different contexts because they are the result of some process that is duplicated. And so in this case, when we talked, somebody gave me pushback on the question of are pituitary tumor giants fragile? And they are fragile. They die early of organ failure because they have outgrown their design parameters, right? You're not designed to be that size, and so your parts don't actually work well as a result of something that we biologists call allometry. Allometry means that things don't scale at the same rate.
You don't have elephant-sized mice or mouse-sized elephants, for instance.
Right. Yeah. So the point is, giants are not simply, as you point out, scaled up smaller entities that work, because lots of processes don't scale. And so if you make an army really, really big and you slow it way, way, way down, then the point is, well, that's a reason that you may not want a big army. There are places where you want a smaller force. And so in any case, the David and Goliath story, which is the Elhanan and Goliath story, is a model. It is a mythological model that builds something in our minds that just because somebody is outgunned, just because somebody is facing a much larger, more powerful foe, does not mean that they will lose. And that's the fight we're in. And frankly, given the reasons that the institutions of civilization are all apparently compromised, and that's what we're seeing, from journalism to the academy to the social media environment. These things are all compromised, and we little guys have to figure out how to take the advantages we have, like the ability to to speak truth and to disagree with each other honorably and discover what is actually right, and the ability to, to crowdsource an audience that is willing to be supportive. All of those things, we have to learn how to apply these things in order that we can fight successfully, because we don't really have a choice.
We don't really have a choice. And I think, the very hopeful thing in that passage I read from Junger's book, Freedom, is that those with the extant and pre-existing power, those with the force, those with the size and the numbers, do not always win. History proves this. And in some cases, they aren't even expected to win. And so, in advance of the section that I read, he talks about fighters in different weight classes, and basically what comes in an army. We just heard about the trade-offs. What comes of having a bigger sized body? You're going to tire sooner. You're going to experience muscle fatigue sooner, all else being equal, if you are having to oxygenate more muscles. So endurance being the word of the day for the David, for the Elhanan, for us, for everyone who is interested in not simply being sucked into the YouTube Borg or whatever it is, right?
Yeah. This is the lesson, and we will. It's also a process of discovery. Well,
exactly. And so, being nimble, not landing in places where if you are found, you can be destroyed, and also having a lot of irons in the fire. So diversifying, and for us. And the point is not primarily about us. For us, we want to be getting the kinds of thinking that we're doing out there into the world, but it's really important to us that everyone else be able to do similar things. And so we could be creating solutions that would protect us and allow us to immediately pretty much replace lost income from YouTube. But Odyssey, where we're streaming from now, is terrific in part because it's not going to decide that what we're doing isn't okay. It's not going to, because the people behind it are honorable and fantastic, but it also couldn't if it wanted to.
Yeah, it's built into the structure of it.
Yeah.